Let's start with a documentary called The Act of Killing from 2012, which no one in their right mind should have seen. In 2003, director Joshua Oppenheimer arrived in Indonesia to film a routine strike on a palm plantation. But the workers were trembling with fear. It turned out that 40 years earlier, their grandparents had been slaughtered during the horrific genocide of the mid-1960s. Anyone who even spoke of human rights was branded a communist and sent to the ditch. Oppenheimer decided to stir things up and spoke to the survivors. The military immediately began smashing his cameras and arresting the group. Then, the director turned the tables. He went directly to the executioners. And then, the most disgusting thing happened. The murderers weren't just not hiding. These figures were incredibly proud of their exploits. The star of this circus of the absurd is Anwar Congo. A common street thug, touting tickets outside movie theaters, he became the leader of a death squad in 1965 and personally strangled over 1,000 people with wire. When Oppenheimer suggested he reenact the executions on camera, the old man beamed. The executioners happily agreed to stage their own crimes. They dressed up as cowboys, acted out scenes from Hollywood gangster films, danced in front of giant fish, and mimed sophisticated torture. A complete loss of reality. In one scene, Anwar's neighbor recounted how these monsters stabbed his stepfather to death, but the killers simply brushed it off. They said the scene was too sad and ruined their beautiful, heroic plot. The director was literally sickened by what he saw. He fainted from exhaustion, suffered from insomnia, and had wild nightmares. He said it was like walking through Germany 40 years after the end of World War II, where the Nazis still ruled. And it's absolutely true. Indonesia's ruling elite and the far-right Pancasila youth still hold the country by the throat. The film was not submitted to official censors because any screening would instantly turn distributors and viewers into state criminals. It reached the point of absurdity. The sound was mixed at a state-run television studio controlled by the very same gangsters featured in the film. Most of the Indonesian crew members removed their names from the credits, replacing them with anonymous to avoid being shot in the back of the head. The film was shown only at closed underground screenings. Officially, the authorities blocked it, but the creators found a way around it, and on September 30th, 2013, opened free access to the film for any computer within Indonesia. Let's move on to the documentary In the Rays of the Sun, released in 2015, which vividly demonstrates how to turn a totalitarian hell into a laughingstock. Russian director Vitaly Mansky wanted to make a film about happy North Korean life. He thought he'd be taking a time machine ride back to Stalin's Soviet Union. But reality proved far harsher. It took him 2 years of grueling negotiations with the North Korean Ministry of Culture to secure permission. Ultimately, officials set out outrageous conditions, a complete impasse. But Mansky got involved. Under the contract, the Koreans had complete control over the filming. They wrote the script, conducted the casting, chose the locations, and even cast the actors to play the parents. The main character was an 8-year-old girl, Lee Zinmi, preparing to join the Children's Union on the day of the shining star. The filmmakers crudely rewrote the biographies of her real parents. They transformed her father, who worked as an ordinary print journalist, into an engineer at a model garment factory. The mother, who worked in the cafeteria, became a frontline worker at a powdered milk factory. Officials allowed filming only 3 times a day, 15 days at a time, under the watchful eye of a crowd of guards. Every night, the censors confiscated the footage and mercilessly erased anything that didn't correspond with the great state lie. But Mansky proved more cunning than the entire Pyongyang machine. He brought along a translator disguised as a dim-witted assistant sound engineer. This man spoke fluent Korean and became his spy on set. The camera rolled continuously, capturing everything that happened between official takes. Crucially, the film crew used a digital system with 2 memory cards. One was used to record the emasculated version for the censors, and the other, the full version, complete with all the rehearsals, fake smiles, and kicks from the supervisors. The filmmakers hid this secret flash drive every day and smuggled it out of the country. The footage revealed the film's blatant falsehood. The viewer sees a sullen Korean director force garment factory workers to smile more broadly and shout that they've exceeded their quota by 150%, and then by 200% in the next take. In another scene, the curators force a terrified family to repeat a silly dialogue about the benefits of kimchi cabbage, which supposedly cures cancer and grants longevity. When the Korean authorities realized they'd been cruelly duped, they filed a furious complaint with the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, demanding that the film be banned. But the attempt to disrupt the screenings failed. North Korean authorities forced the poor girl's family to condemn the director, calling him a dark-hearted man who allegedly fabricated everything himself. But the entire world has already seen this grandiose theatrical production of the absurd. In North Korea, the film, of course, is permanently banned. Now let's take a look at the British documentary No Fire Zone, The Killing Fields of Sri Lanka, filmed in 2013 by director Callum McRae. This film is a pure concentrate of bureaucratic cynicism and geopolitical hypocrisy, laced with blood. Do you know how to eliminate witnesses to a civil war that raged for 26 years? It's simple. The state declares specific patches of land safe havens, herds about 400,000 civilians there, and then methodically bombards these zones with heavy artillery. This is how government troops decided to finish off the rebels from the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Alam. The funniest thing is that director McRae didn't shoot a single frame himself. He simply assembled digital garbage. The footage was made up of videos shot by ordinary people on cheap cell phones during the last 138 days of this bloodbath. But the most vile thing about the film is the footage shot by the government soldiers themselves. The executioners recorded extrajudicial executions and torture on their phones like war trophies. They bragged to each other. The central piece of evidence for this state atrocity was the story of a 12-year-old boy named Balachandran Prabhakaran, the son of a rebel leader. Initially, Sri Lankan generals claimed the boy had died accidentally in crossfire. This lie was shattered by the metadata of a single camera. Photographs taken just hours apart reveal the following. In the first image, a frightened child sits in a sandy trench, guarded by government soldiers, dejectedly munching on a biscuit. In the second, the same boy lies on the ground, with his chest ripped open. An examination by British forensic pathologist Derek Pounder revealed that the child had been shot point blank from a distance of 2 to 3 feet. 5 bullet wounds. In other words, he could have reached the gun barrel used to kill him. So much for accidental crossfire. When McRae brought this film to the UN Human Rights Council session in Geneva, the eyes of the world's diplomats twitched. Official Colombo immediately howled, calling the film a fake and propaganda. But neighboring India went the furthest. The Indian Central Censor Board flatly refused to issue the film a distribution certificate. The ban was justified by the fact that showing this truth could damage friendly relations with Sri Lanka. What touching concern for the feelings of the executioners. Following India, the film was completely banned in Malaysia, Nepal, and, naturally, Sri Lanka itself. Even then British Prime Minister David Cameron gritted his teeth and declared it one of the most horrific films he had ever seen. Do you think the bans worked? Hell no. The creators simply made the film freely available online to residents of all countries where it was banned. Because in the internet age, trying to hide genocide is like trying to cover an erupting volcano with your hand. The truth will always come out, no matter how hard politicians clasp hands over the bodies of murdered children. Now prepare yourself for the absolute triumph of human cruelty and hypocrisy. The 2005 documentary Earthlings, which will transform your everyday meal into a session of existential horror. It all began in 1999, when American director Sean Monson received a banal commission to film a video about the neutering of stray dogs in Los Angeles. But what he saw behind the closed doors of shelters so shattered his resolve that he threw the original script in the trash. Instead, he launched a massive investigation that would last 6 long years. He and his film crew infiltrated slaughterhouses, farms, and secret laboratories, using hidden cameras, fake IDs, and espionage tactics. They peered into places no normal person would ever dream of. The film unceremoniously divides our civilization into 5 bloody sectors: pets, food, clothing, entertainment, and scientific experiments. To make this endless parade of suffering easier to digest, the film's score was composed by Moby, and the narration was narrated by Joaquin Phoenix in his signature voice of a weary philosopher. But even this duet doesn't save it from shock. The film shows the underbelly of familiar things. You'll see how vaunted humane bolt-action guns misfire, and cows are beaten to death with ordinary iron bars. But the pinnacle of human ingenuity is the fur trade. To avoid damaging the fox or mink pelt, workers use anal electrocution. They literally fry the animal from the inside with electricity for the sake of an expensive collar. In circuses, elephants and tigers are broken with iron hooks to the sound of cheerful music. And in laboratories, chemicals are poured into monkeys' eyes without anesthesia to test a new shampoo. Naturally, the meat and cosmetics industries were furious. Major television channels and streaming platforms immediately declared an unofficial boycott of the film, fearing the loss of millions in advertising budgets. The film was simply brushed under the rug, ostensibly out of concern for viewers' psyche, but it was leaked online anyway. Joaquin Phoenix later said it was the most talked about film of his career, and philosopher Tom Regan gloomily remarked that the world would never be the same after this spectacle. But the most brutal, surreal episode in this film's story took place not on farms, but in the quiet Ukrainian city of Lutsk. On July 21, 2020, a local madman named Maxim Krivosh seized a bus with 13 hostages. Armed with a machine gun and grenades, he held them hostage for 12 hours. And do you know what his main demand was? No, not millions of dollars or a helicopter to the border. He demanded that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky personally record a video and post it on social media, urging the entire country to watch the film Earthlings. And the funniest thing is, the president actually did it. Zelensky actually posted the video on his page, where he said in Russian, "The film Earthlings from 2005. Watch it, everyone." Immediately afterward, Krivosh released the remaining hostages and surrendered to the police without resistance. The president's video was deleted 5 minutes after the assault, and the terrorist was sent to prison for 13 years. During the sentencing, he even threw a bar of soap at the judge, apparently expressing his contempt for the system. The filmmakers later hastily declared that they condemned any form of terror, as their film was about compassion, not about hijacking buses. But you have to admit, it's impossible to come up with a better advertisement for a banned film. Now let's talk about director Michael Moore's documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11, released in 2004. This film managed to spark a major controversy within the American establishment. In 2003, Moore conceived the idea of making a hard-hitting lampoon about the September 11th tragedy. But all the Hollywood bigwigs immediately fled the project due to its nuclear political agenda. No one wanted to stick their necks in the noose. Suddenly, Mel Gibson came along and funded it. Then the project was snapped up by Miramax, a studio led by the famous Weinstein brothers. Moore began digging. The film hits hard from the very first minutes. Moore openly questions the integrity of the 2000 elections. He claims that George W. Bush was declared president prematurely, simply due to pressure from loyal media outlets. But the real bombshell was yet to come. The director exposed the dirty laundry of the American elite, revealing their 30-year friendship with the Saudi royal family. And the icing on the cake, Moore uncovered that immediately after the September 11th attacks, while all planes in the country were grounded, the U.S. government organized a secret flight. It quietly spirited 24 members of Osama bin Laden's family out of the country, without interrogation, without unnecessary questions from the intelligence agencies. The tragedy was simply used as a convenient cover, the perfect pretext to start a war in Iraq in 2003. When Miramax executives saw the nearly finished film, they rushed to boast to their parent corporation, Walt Disney. That's when the mousy conglomerate had a heart attack. Disney, fearing the loss of its Florida tax breaks, banned the film from release. Harvey Weinstein was furious. He refused to silently tolerate the management's whims and dumped the entire scandal on the pages of the New York Times. A massive media war ensued. As a result, Disney shamefully capitulated. They sold the film rights to the Weinsteins personally for $6 million, with the stipulation that 60% of the profits would go to charity. Then the classic forbidden fruit effect kicked in. Conservative lobbyists began pressuring movie theaters to cancel screenings. But people rushed to buy tickets like crazy. The film debuted at the Cannes Film Festival and immediately snatched the Palme d'Or. In its first weekend in America, the film grossed a staggering $23.9 million. Its final gross exceeded $222 million against a paltry $6 million budget. This made the film the highest-grossing documentary in history. While the civilized world admired the director's courage, the Middle East unleashed its own circus. Kuwait immediately banned the film, and in Saudi Arabia, censors shredded the footage beyond recognition. Conservatives even launched a lawsuit over the film's promotion, which forever rewrote the rules of political advertising in America. The authorities tried to silence the truth, but suffered a crushing blow to their wallets and reputations. Now let's talk about the documentary thriller The Cove, released in 2009, whose creators staged a true spy madness to save animals. The plot revolves around the Japanese town of Taiji, where fishermen have been running a lucrative slaughterhouse for centuries under the guise of a cultural tradition. In 2008, American photographer Louis Sahoyas teamed up with former dolphin trainer Rick O'Barry. The duo decided to expose a Japanese industry. Thousands of dolphins are annually herded into a closed bay in Taiji. The hunting method is horribly barbaric. Fishermen lower long metal poles into the sea and pound them with hammers. A hellish wall of noise is created underwater, disrupting the creature's echolocation. Panicked, the animals rush away from the roar and are caught in nets. The most beautiful dolphins are sold to dolphinariums around the world, fetching up to $150,000 per specimen. The remaining dolphins are herded into an isolated area surrounded by barbed wire and slaughtered for meat with gaffs. Within a couple of hours, the water in the bay turns bright red. The Japanese government flatly refused to allow a film crew into this death zone, but Sahoyos and O'Barry waged a covert war against the local authorities. To film the carnage, they hired professional artists to create artificial stones. High-definition cameras were hidden inside these fake boulders. At night, the film crew sneaked past guard posts, climbed the cliffs, and installed these stone masks. They also deployed military-grade thermal imaging cameras, night vision goggles, and underwater hydrophones. They received shocking footage. It turned out that more dolphins were being slaughtered in this small bay than whales in all of Antarctica. In total, the Japanese whaling industry killed over 23,000 dolphins annually. But the most cynical trick was that dolphin meat was sold in Japanese supermarkets as whale meat. However, dolphin meat was saturated with mercury. Tests showed mercury levels in samples exceeded the safety limit by 265 times. The Japanese limit is only 0.4 parts per million. Officials knew full well they were poisoning their own people with toxic waste, but they covered up the business for profit. Mercury levels in the hair of local residents exceeded the safety limit by 40 times. Japan was literally furious. Authorities accused the filmmakers of cultural imperialism. Far-right groups attacked the few cinemas that dared to show the film. The film was effectively banned in Japan. But they couldn't stop its triumph. The Cove won an Academy Award at the 82nd Academy Awards. Under public pressure, the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums officially banned the purchase of dolphins captured in Taiji in May 2015. But the slaughter there continues to this day, because human greed always finds a way. And now we have the legendary documentary nightmare, The Titty Cat Crazies, released in 1967, which American officials buried in a legal grave for many decades. It all began when a respectable Boston University law professor named Frederick Weissman decided to trade his cozy classroom for a movie camera. He wanted to show how civilized society hides from view those commonly called the criminally insane. By some miracle, he secured permission to film at Massachusetts General Hospital, Bridgewater. The facility's director agreed to let him in on one condition. The film crew would be accompanied by medical staff at all times. Weissman nodded, picked up his camera, and stepped behind the fence. Over 29 days of filming, cinematographer John Marshall wound 80,000 feet of footage. It was 40 hours of concentrated, distilled, medieval hell in the heart of America. No voiceover, no plaintive violins or pompous interviews, only naked, chilling observation. The camera captured the sick being held in completely empty, icy stone cells, washed once every 100 years, and forced to march naked through the corridors. Guards and orderlies taunted the incapacitated like schoolyard bullies. The most disgusting, blood-curdling episode was the force-feeding of a prisoner through a tube. A doctor casually shoves a tube into the unfortunate man's nose, while a guard stands nearby, openly mocking and ridiculing the process. A veritable conveyor belt for the destruction of human dignity. When Weissman edited this abomination and staged its first screening, the local political elite, led by Lieutenant Governor Elliot Richardson, were terrified. They immediately realized that if this film were released, the state of Massachusetts would be hit with so many lawsuits from patients' families that it would be forced to sell off state property. But how can you ban the truth in a country with free speech? The answer is to hide behind concerns about morality. The authorities rushed to court with a brilliant argument. The film violated the insane people's right to privacy. They argued that they were insane and they couldn't have given informed legal consent to be filmed. And the court took the bait. In 1968, the film was officially banned from showing. Prints were ordered removed from theaters and destroyed. It was the first time in the history of the United States that a film was completely banned, not on grounds of national security or vulgarity, but on the grounds of privacy. The irony is astounding. The system didn't care that people inside the hospital were being treated worse than cattle, but it was infuriated that they were being filmed without written permission. The blockade lasted for 23 long years. Weissman, a stubborn lawyer, refused to give in. In 1987, 5 patients committed suicide in this damned hospital due to medical negligence, and the director launched a new assault. In 1989, the judges mockingly allowed the film's release, but on the condition that the patients' faces be blurred. Weissman laughed in their faces. He proved that the film was shot on film, not video, and that technical blurring would render the work an unreadable mess. Finally, in 1991, the ban finally collapsed. The truth came out, albeit a quarter century late, proving that the state machine is prepared to resort to any despicable act to cover up its own rotting organs. Next up is the mockumentary masterpiece, The War Game, released in 1962, which British officials and BBC bosses kept under wraps for 20 years. It was 1965, at the height of the Cold War, when ordinary people were falling asleep with thoughts of Soviet warheads. A young English director, Peter Watkins, was commissioned by the BBC to make a film about a hypothetical nuclear strike on Great Britain. Officials were apparently hoping for a dreary propaganda piece along the lines of, "Hold on tight to your umbrellas, citizens, and everything will be fine." But Watkins approached the task with all the seriousness only a cynical professional can muster. He didn't contrive horror stories out of thin air, but instead invited leading physicists, military analysts, and doctors. Together, they created an absolutely realistic, scientifically sound disaster scenario. Watkins chose the quiet county of Kent as his target, and what he showed on screen made even the most steadfast of souls tremble. No brave soldiers or triumphant music. A flash, and residential buildings instantly turn into smoldering ash. Firestorms incinerate entire neighborhoods, and firefighters are simply physically unable to cope with this inferno. Survivors writhe in agony from severe burns and radiation sickness. There are no medical supplies, and food is rapidly running out. Ultimately, law and order collapse within a couple of days. Pogroms and looting break out, and the police, without further ado, shoot rioters right in the streets. The state machine in this scenario appears not as a savior, but as a completely helpless and paralyzed impotent. When BBC management saw the finished material, they went into a collective hysteria. The corporation, which had always boasted of its independence, immediately ran to the cabinet office to complain. Prime Minister Harold Wilson and his senior officials personally viewed the film. The verdict was unanimous. This film should not be shown to the public. In 1966, the broadcast was officially canceled. Do you know how they explained it? The BBC's official line is pure British hypocrisy. They claimed the film was too scary and could cause mass panic and heart attacks among impressionable viewers. But government archives declassified half a century later revealed the real reason for this veto. The authorities were terrified that this film would completely destroy public trust in the national civil defense system. If people saw that in the event of a real war, the government wouldn't save anyone, they would simply abandon the country's nuclear doctrine and take to the streets in protest. While the film was becoming an urban legend in Britain, it was secretly shown at international film festivals. At Venice, for example, it managed to win a special prize. And in 1967, the American Film Academy awarded Watkins an Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. A stunning absurdity. The best documentary of the year, according to the international community, was banned from showing in its home country. The ban lasted for exactly 20 years. Only on July 31st, 1985, precisely on the 40th anniversary of the Hiroshima tragedy, did British audiences finally get to see this masterpiece on television. By then, of course, the world had become accustomed to other nightmares. But this incident remains a permanent monument to how the state machine is ready to stifle any art that reveals the unvarnished truth.